Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gnostic Studies. Tonight we're going to do part 4 of the series of the mystery religions of the ancients. The origins of Freemasonry. Freemasonry rests upon 3 fundamental degrees, summarizing the triple study which must occupy the Mason. First, where he comes from, the study of God. Second, what he is, the study of himself and his perfection. And third, where he's going, the study of his transformation. In 1646, Elias Ashmole, helped by initiates who had observed the decreasing number of the actual guilds of Masonic workmen in the corporation of workmen which served to shelter them and which were still alive in England, protected by their separation from the continent of Europe, Ashmole occupied himself with regenerating the mysteries of ancient Indian and Egyptian initiation under the architectural veil of Masonry, and of giving to the new association a goal of union, of fraternity, of perfection, of equality, and of science, by means of a universal bond, based upon the laws of nature and upon love for humanity. He created, according to the ancient traditions and the documents that he was able to collect, the first degree in 1646, the second degree in 1648, and the third degree in 1649. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them in the comments area. The degrees of Freemasonry. The first degree. Freemasonry is called the royal art. Art, because all work is only achieved through a certain combination of principles tending towards the accomplishment of the subject that the artist proposes. Royal, in order to pay homage to the wise king who possessed in depth laws of the philosophical work. The object of research for the Masons is the knowledge of the art of perfecting that which nature left imperfect in a human being, and of arriving at the treasure of true morality, symbolized in ancient philosophy as the philosophical stone. The purification or divesting the matter of its impurities has its symbol in Masonry as well. One must divest the candidate of all the prejudices and of the error of their dangerous passions, in order to bring them to virtue and to perfection. This is the same brute stone, or rough ashlar, that the Masons work with or polish, and with which they seek to remove the superfluousness, which in moral Masonry is called the destruction of vices. Second degree. This is where the truth of Masonry is proven. The sense of things is explained, such as the blazing star, etc. Masonry has adopted the primitive doctrine, proclaimed the G.A., the great architect of the universe, whom it honors through praises, free of all cult and of superstition. It recommends the love of one's neighbor, the practice of virtue, of equality and of charity, and the horror of vice, of lies, and of hypocrisy, as well as tolerance for opinions, submission to the laws, respect for the rights of others, universal kindness, and the perfection of oneself through instruction in the spirit of fraternity. In Masonry, the celestial quintessence is designed or manufactured through the 5-pointed blazing star, called the central fire of nature by the philosophers, and also symbolized by the letter G, which means generation of bodies. Third degree. This is where actual mastery is known. It is, in its summary, only a pale reflection of primitive initiation, where the allegorical drama was disfigured by the succession of political events at the time of its renovation. such that the moral symbolism leaves a great part of the philosophic symbolism behind. The alteration of the system is such, and the developments are so incomplete, that today one must have the skill of a venerable instruction in order to give some insight into the interpretations of the condensed hieroglyphs. Even the phoenix has disappeared from this beautiful decree. Any questions? Please share them in the comments area. The roots and customs of Freemasonry. Modern Freemasonry honors as its great teachers Zoroaster, Pythagoras, Plato, and many others, and has adopted their teachings, and in some of its degrees, it even gives a brief summary of their doctrines. These great teachers were all initiated into the mysteries, and fundamentally their doctrines were all the same. All of these ancient teachers taught the existence of the great architect of the universe, the importance of the soul, and the unqualified brotherhood of all humanity. The whole superstructure of Masonry is built upon the traditions of the universal science and the sublime philosophy that was once taught in the great mystery schools of Egypt, Chaldea, Persia, India, and other nations of antiquity. And Masonic ritual serves as a living monument to the great mystery schools of the past. The degrees of Masonry are one-act plays, often staged with costume, scenery, special effects, and the full rigging of any production. The purpose is to examine different philosophies, ancient religions, and systems of ethics. Theater is the oldest known means of teaching, especially of teaching abstract ideas. It was one of the principal means of instruction in the Middle Ages, as well as in ancient Greece and Rome. Most of the Masonic degrees are set in ancient Israel, because it is from the legends surrounding King Solomon's temple that Masonry takes many of its parables and lessons. That ancient Egypt and medieval Europe also serve as degree settings. In the ancient mysteries, theater, dance, and music were used to educate the initiates in the higher knowledge. In this way, the initiates were able to receive information in the three brains, the intellectual, emotional, and motor instinctive sexual. These form part of the esoteric anatomy of the soul. Through a performed story, or what we might call an opera or drama, the initiates were able to receive a lot of information, and it could be recalled somewhat easily, allowing the symbolic meaning of the story to be discovered any time afterwards. The sacred dances in the times of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, etc., transmitted tremendous cosmic, anthropogenetic, psychobiological, mathematical truths, etc. Modern artists no longer know anything about the sacred dances of the ancient mysteries. The tenebrous ones have stolen the theater and the stage. They have profaned it and totally prostituted it. The Sabbath, the day of the theater, the day of the mysteries, was very popular in the ancient temples. Marvelous cosmic dramas were then presented. Drama served to transmit valuable teachings to the initiates. Different ways to experience the being and the manifestations of the being were transmitted to the initiates by means of drama. The cosmic dramas are based on the law of seven. Certain intelligent deviations of this law were always utilized in order to transmit transcendental teachings to the neophyte. In music, it is well known that certain notes can produce happiness in the intellectual center. Other notes can produce sadness in the emotional center. And other notes can produce religiosity in the motor center. Indeed, the old Hierophants never ignored that integral knowledge can only be acquired through the three brains. A single brain cannot give complete information. The sacred dance and the cosmic drama, wisely combined with music, serve to transmit tremendous archaic teachings of a cosmogenetic, psychobiological, psychochemical, metaphysical type, etc., to the neophytes. In addition to this, it is suitable here to mention sculpture. The latter was grandiose in bygone times. The allegorical beings chiseled on hard rock reveal to us that the ancient masters never ignored the law of seven. Let us remember the Sphinx of Giza in Egypt. The Sphinx depicts for us the four elements of nature and the four basic conditions of the superior human being. The traditions, symbols, and ritual of modern Freemasonry cluster around the building of the Temple of Solomon, the legend of the widow's son, Hiram Abiff, who lost his life in the defense of his integrity, and the search for the lost word of the Master. All of its elements play their role to symbolically teach us something about the spiritual path and the development of the soul. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments area. Masonic symbolism and the legends of Hiram Abiff.
The Masonic legend.
The Masonic legend, initiatic symbolism. The legend of the three traitors of Hiram Abiff. The first legend. Solomon, the wisest of all kings of his time, wanted to build a temple to the Eternal, assemble together in Jerusalem all suitable workers for the construction of the edifice. He had an edict published throughout his kingdom, which spread itself over the entire land, that whosoever wished to come to Jerusalem to work on the construction of the temple would be well received and well rewarded, on condition that he be virtuous, full of zeal and courage, and not subject to any vice. Soon Jerusalem was found to be filled with a multitude of men who knew the noble virtues of Solomon, and who asked to be registered for the work of the temple. Solomon, being assured of a large number of workmen, made treaties with all neighboring kings, in particular with the king of Tyre, to the effect that he might select from Mount Lebanon all the cedars and other woods which were suitable to him, as well as other materials. The work was already begun when Solomon remembered a man named Hiram, the most knowledgeable man of his time in architecture, who was wise and virtuous, and whom the king of Tyre liked a lot for his great qualities. He perceived also that so great a number of workers could not conduct their work without a lot of difficulty and confusion. Also, the work was beginning to be greatly hampered by the discussions which prevailed among them. So Solomon resolved then to give them a worthy chief capable of maintaining good order, and made the choice of this to be Hiram, an Ethiopian by nationality. He sent deputies loaded with gifts to the king of Tyre, in order to implore him to send the famous architect named Hiram. The king of Tyre, charmed by the high notion that Solomon showed him, accorded him, sending him Hiram and his deputies filled with riches and amity for Solomon, and to tell him that, despite the treaty that they had made together, he accorded Solomon an alliance forever, placing at his disposition all that could be proved useful to him in his kingdom. The deputies arrived in Jerusalem, accompanied by Hiram, on July 15th, a beautiful summer day. They entered into Solomon's palace. Hiram was received with all the pomp and magnificence due his great qualities. The same day, Solomon gave a festival for all the workers in honor of his arrival. The next day, Solomon assembled the council chamber to settle matters of importance. Hiram was among them and was received with favor. Solomon said to him before all in attendance, Hiram, I chose you as chief and great architect of the temple, as well as for the workers. I give you full power over them, without them needing another opinion other than yours. Thus, I regard you as my friend to whom I would confide the greatest of my secrets. Next, they left the council chamber and went to work among all the workers, where Solomon himself sat in a loud and intelligible voice while showing Hiram to them. Here is the man I have chosen as your chief and to guide you. You will obey him as he would me. I give him all power over you and over the work. Those who will become rebellious to my orders and to his will fall under penalty and will be punished in whatever manner he judges appropriate. Then they made a tour of the job site, and everything was put into Hiram's hands, who promised Solomon to put everything into good working order. The following day, Hiram assembled all the workers and said unto them, My friends, the king, our master, has charged me with the custody of maintaining order among you, and of regulating all the work of the temple. I have no doubt that all of you are filled with zeal to execute his orders and mine. There are those among you who merit distinguished salaries. Each one of you may attain this through evidence, which will show the future of one's work. It is for your own rest and to distinguish your zeal that I am going to form 3 classes out of all of you who are workers. The first will be composed of apprentices, the second of those of companions, and the third of those the masters. The first will be paid accordingly, and will receive their salary at the door of the temple, at the J column. The second, also at the door of the temple, at the B column. And the third in the sanctuary of the temple. Payment was found to be greater according to rank, and each of them was found to be happy to be under the authority of such a worthy chief. Peace, friendship, and harmony reigned among them. The respectable Hiram, wanting for all things to exist in good order, and not wishing for any confusion among the workers, applied to each rank signs, words, and grips, or handshakes, by which its members could recognize each other, with prohibition to all from confiding these to any others without the express permission of the king or of their chief. Thus, they received their salary only upon giving their sign, and in such a way so that the masters were paid as masters, the companions as companions, and the apprentices as apprentices. In accordance with such a perfect rule, Each class of workers were in peace, and the work continued just as Solomon desired it should. But could so fine an order remain for long without upset and without revolution? If you have any questions or comments about what we have read for so far, please feel free to share them in the comments area.
No. In fact, three companions pushed by greed and envy to receive the pay of masters resolved to know the word of the master. And as they could only obtain it from the respectable master Hiram, they formed a design to get it from him either in goodwill or by force. Since the respectable Hiram went every day into the sanctuary of the temple in order to make his prayers to the Eternal around 5 o'clock in the evening, they agreed together to wait for him to exit and then to demand of him the word of the masters. And there being 3 doors to the temple, one to the east, one to the west, and the other to the south, they divided themselves between these doors, one armed with a ruler, one with a lever, and other with a mallet. And so they waited for him. Having finished his prayer, Hiram wanted to exit through the door of the south, but there he encountered one of the traders, armed with a ruler, who stopped him and demanded the word of the master. Hiram, astonished, explained to him that it was not in this way that he might obtain it, and that he would rather die than give it to him. The trader, enraged by his refusal, struck him with his ruler. Hiram felt he had been struck and, stunned from the blow, withdrew and tried to exit through the door of the west, where he encountered the second trader, who demanded the same as the first. Hiram still refused to give him the word, which also enraged this trader, who struck him a blow with the lever. That made Hiram stumble back inside and withdraw towards the door of the east. But the third trader, who was waiting for him there, stopped him and demanded the same as the preceding ones. Hiram told him that he preferred death rather than to declare to him a secret he did not yet merit. This trader, offended by his refusal, gave him so great a blow with his mallet that he killed him. As it was still day, the traders took the body of Hiram and hid it in a pile of waste north of the temple, waiting for night in order to transport it further away. In fact, as soon as it was night, they transported it out of the city to a high mountain, where they buried it. And since they had decided that they would take it even further away at another time, they planted on the grave an acacia branch, so as to be able to recognize the place. And then all 3 of them returned to Jerusalem. The respectable Hiram was in the habit of going daily to Solomon, first thing in the morning, to give him an account of the work and to receive his orders. Solomon, not seeing Hiram on the following day, sent one of his officers to fetch him. But the man returned, saying he had searched everywhere and that no one had been able to find him. This answer saddened Solomon, who went himself to look for him in the temple and had a thorough search made of the whole city. The 3rd day, Hiram, having gone to pray in the temple sanctuary, came out by the eastern door, There he was surprised to see a few traces of blood. He followed them to the pile of waste in the north. He had it searched, and nothing else was found except that it had been recently disturbed. He trembled with horror and took it as a sign that Hiram had been murdered. He went back into the temple to weep at the loss of such a great man. Then he went into the court of the temple, where he called together all the masters and said to them, "My brothers, the loss of your chief is certain." At these words, each of them fell into a deep sadness, which brought about a long period of silence, interrupted at last by Solomon saying that 9 from among them must resolve to leave to search for the body of Hiram and bring it back to the temple. Solomon had scarcely finished speaking when all the masters wanted to go, even the oldest, without regard for the difficulty of the trail. Solomon, seeing their zeal, told them that only 9 of them would leave, and that they would be chosen by the voice of the ballot. Those whom chance selected for the search were so transported by joy that they undid their sandals so as to be more agile and set out on foot. 3 took the road of the south, 3 took the road of the west, and 3 took that of the east, promising to one another to meet in the north on the 9th day of their walk. Eventually one of them sat down to rest, and finding himself quite tired and wishing to stretch out on the ground, took hold of an acacia branch for support. But the freshly planted branch remained in his hand, and this, of course, surprised him. And it was then that he saw a rather large space of newly turned earth, and took this as a sign that Hiram was buried in this place. His strength renewed, and animated by courage, he went to rejoin the other masters who were meeting back up as the 9 had promised each other. He took them to the place that he had come from and said what he knew, and they put themselves to excavate that earth, being all animated with the same zeal. In fact, the body of the respectable Hiram was buried there. And when they discovered it, they were seized with horror, recoiling back and trembling. Then sorrow took hold of their hearts, and they wept a long time. But at last they found again their courage. One of them went into the grave and took hold of Hiram by the index finger of the right hand, wanting to raise him. But Hiram's flesh was already decomposing and smelled foul, which made him fall back, saying, "I klinge," which means he stinks. Another took hold of him by the finger next to the index. But the same thing happened to him as had happened to the first, and he withdrew, saying, "Jachin." The response is Boaz. The masters consulted each other, since they did not ignore that in dying Hiram had preserved the secret word of the masters. They resolved to change it, and decided that the first word uttered when the body was raised from the grave would serve as the new word. Then the oldest one of them entered the grave and gripped the good Hiram just above the wrist of the right hand, pressing his chest against the cadavers, his knee and his right foot pressed together, the left hand behind the cadaver's back and against its right shoulder. And in this way he lifted Hiram from the grave. His body made a muffled sound, which frightened them. But the master, still full of courage, cried out, "Mak benak," which means the flesh comes away from the bones. Then they repeated the word to one another while embracing each other, and took up the body of the respectable Hiram and carried it to Jerusalem. They arrived in the middle of the night, but the moon was exceedingly bright, and they entered into the temple, where they put down the body of Hiram. Solomon, informed of their arrival, came to the temple accompanied by all the masters, who were all attired in white gloves and an apron, where they gave their last honors to the respectable Hiram. Solomon had him buried in the sanctuary and had a gold plate placed on his tomb, which was triangular in shape, whereon was engraved in Hebrew the name of the Eternal. Then he rewarded the masters with compasses of gold, which they attached to their garments by means of a blue ribbon, and they exchanged the new words, signs, and grips. The same ceremonies are done when pulling the candidate from a coffin at his reception. The password is Giblin, the name of the small village nearest where Hiram's body was buried.
If you have any questions about what we've read so far, feel free to put them in the comments area. We appreciate them. Thank you. An interpretation of the Masonic legend and its relationship with the Egyptian legend. One finds in the modern Masonic rite the reproduction of the Egyptian fable, only instead of Osiris, inventor of arts, or the sun, the name of Hiram is taken, which signifies risen, raised, or elevated, an epithet that belongs to the sun, and who was skillful in the arts. Let us examine the movement of the sun from the summer solstice and the allegory in this decreasing period, with the last 3 months represented as 3 companion assassins. The explanation of this astronomical occurrence of the instruments of the so-called murder will give us the interpretation of the degree. The sun, in the summer solstice, provokes among all those who breathe songs of remembrance. So Hiram, who represents it, can give to whosoever has the right the sacred word, and that is to say the life. When the sun descends in the inferior signs, the mutism of nature begins. Hiram can then no longer give the sacred word to the companions who represent the last 3 inert months of the year. Note, in ancient initiation, the wicked companions were the hippopotamus of the Nile, the Greek python, which is an anagram of Typhon, the boar, who mortally wounds the handsome Adonis, the giants who undertook the goal to dethrone Osiris, the Titans, who attempted to climb Mount Olympus, the genii of darkness and evil, the 3 months of winter, the Scandinavian wolf, the Chinese dragon, who hunts the sun, Ahriman. One of these companions is named, in some degrees, Abi Bama, one who overturns the father. These monsters, men or animals, seem to struggle against the ostensible father of men, the sun. The first companion is supposed to have weakly struck Hiram with a ruler of 24 inches. This is the image of the 24 hours that last for each daily revolution. First distribution of time, which, after the exaltation of the great star, attends weekly to his existence by giving him the first blow. The second struck him with the square of iron, symbol of the last season, represented in the intersections of the 2 right lines which divide the zodiacal circle into 4 equal parts, the center of which symbolizes the heart of Hiram, where the dividing point of the 4 squares represents the four seasons. Second distribution of time, which, in this age, carries a greater blow to solar existence. So first we have the 24 hours of the day, sun rises and the sun sets. And here we have the longitudinal and latitudinal lines of the earth and the representation of the four seasons. The third companion struck him mortally in the forehead with a strong blow of the mallet, the cylindrical form of which symbolizes the year, that is to say, a circle or ring, the third distribution of time, the accomplishment of which carries the last blow to the existence of the expiring sun. So those are the three divisions of time: the hours, the days, and the years, and the seasons being the months, really. So the image of this successive and natural law of things, terrible law of the life over death, of the present over the past, a law which has been so abused, is ingeniously symbolized in this degree. In fact, each period or cyclic empire could only be established by the murder of deletion of one who represented the empire of the previous epoch. Thus, the seed, the sun, kills the grain of wheat, his father, in the womb of the earth, his mother, as Uranus kills his father, Akman, as Saturn kills his father, Uranus, as Jupiter, Lord of Good, mutilated in order to reign his infertile father, Saturn, who, relegated to the dark Tartarus, where the Titans are chained, as the 12th apostle Judas left Jesus, his master, to die like the 12th month, December, kills the year that ends, like Saturday kills the week. Our west or Occident, from occidere, meaning to kill, which kills the stars, has no other origin, and it is with this mystical language of imaginary assassins, such as that of Abel, etc., the charlatans have added monstrous superfluities to the degree of master. So we can see in this way kills is meaning the end of a cycle. Something ends in order for something else to begin. From this interpretation, one concludes that Hiram, founder of metal, became the hero of the new legend with the title of architect, and is Osiris, the son of modern initiation. That Isis, his virgin, is the large emblem of the earth. In Sanskrit, Yoga, the world, and that Horus, son of Osiris, or of the light, and son of the Virgin, is the Freemason. That is to say, the initiate who lives in the terrestrial lodge, the child of the Virgin and of the light. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments area. The building of the Temple of Solomon, Part 1. Now let's look at the temple. Remember that in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, it says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God?" The building of the temple is a symbol for the process of the development of the soul, and is related to what is called the Holy Spirit in Christianity. The Holy Spirit is one part of the Trinity of God, the triple unity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These are the Christian names for the three primary forces. Other religions use different terms to describe these same aspects. In Gnosis, the triple unity of God is known as the Logos, in its unified aspect, and as the first Logos, the affirming, the second Logos, denying, and the third Logos, reconciling, in its triple aspect. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are substances, forces. They are transcendental and extremely divine energies. That is all. What happens is that people, unfortunately, have a marked tendency to anthropomorphize these superior forces, or to project human qualities upon these cosmic forces. And here we have a diagram showing here the wholly affirming, the denying, and the reconciling. The three logos, the three primary forces. So what is called the Holy Spirit, or the third logos, is the holy reconciling force. The building of the temple, or the development of the soul, requires a reconciliation between the individual and the divine, between humanity and God, between spirit and matter. Reconcile means to bring into agreement or harmony, make compatible or consistent. Reconciliation means an act of reconciling or the state of being reconciled, the process of making consistent or compatible. Therefore, we need to bring ourselves into agreement or harmony with God. That is, to make ourselves consistent or compatible with the divine, which is, of course, the purpose of religion. Religious principles or eternal values are what we call the esoteric knowledge which was transmitted to the neophyte in the mystery schools. Spirit and matter both exist, and our goal is not the exclusion of one over another. Our goal is to make it so that the spirit is not a slave of matter, so that spirit controls matter. The purpose of this is so that we are not slaves of our senses, our desires, or our fears. Buddhism emphasizes this concept very well, and Christianity also stresses its importance. And this is, of course, the reason that the candidate had to be duly and truly prepared before their entrance into the mystery school. Our senses, our desires, and our fears serve a purpose within us, and in order to understand that purpose, we must study Gnostic psychology. My senses give me information, and I could use that information consciously. But what I must not do is become a slave of that information and live only for it, neglecting the spiritual aspect of life, including the faculties of the soul, which I may need to develop. If you have any questions or comments on what we've read so far, you could put them in the comments area. The building of the Temple of Solomon. The building of the Temple at Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible. See 1 Kings chapter 6, 7, and 8. Here's some highlights. Chapter 6, verse 1 to 2. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. The house that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. In Freemasonry, the measurements and proportion of the temple are highlighted in order to emphasize the science of numbers, form, and proportion, which manifest themselves in architecture, and to connect them with the spiritual temple to which they're Kabbalistically related. 6-7. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built. Verse 29. Around all of the walls of the house he carved engraved figures of cherubim and palm trees and open flowers in the inner and outer rooms. If we also consider the statement that the temple was constructed without the sound of hammer or of any tool of iron, And it becomes clear that this is more likely referring to the spiritual temple, not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. From 2 Corinthians 5. Chapter 7, verse 1. Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. Verse 13 to 14. And King Solomon sent and brought Hiram from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in bronze. And he was full of wisdom, understanding, and skill for making any work in bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all this work. Bronze is a metal alloy of copper, which is the metal attributed to the planet Venus, and tin, the metal for the planet Jupiter. In verse 40, so Hiram finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the Lord. Chapter 8, verse 6, and the priest brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. In the Masonic legend, Hiram Abiff is dramatically represented to have lost his life when the temple was near completion. Yet in the Bible it says that he completed the temple, and elsewhere it's recorded that after the completion of the temple, Hiram labored for years constructing and decorating a palace for King Solomon. Any questions or comments about what we've read so far? You can put them in the comments area. The symbolism in the Masonic Lodge. Masonic lodges are dedicated to the saints John, one of whom is John the Evangelist, who opens his Gnostic gospel with the Greek philosophy of the Logos, and the other is John, the seer of Patmos, who wrote Revelation, a book symbolic of ancient initiation, which many uninitiated persons have tried in vain to interpret. There is a deep significance in the dedication of lodges to the saints John, because of what we already know about the verb logos, and because in Revelations we learn about the establishment of the heavenly Jerusalem. The city which we already know is the location of the Temple of Solomon. Let's look, for example, at Revelations chapter 21, verses 16 through 17, where it says, and the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal, a perfect cube. And he measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man that is an angel. The language is evidently a veil, designed to conceal the real meaning from the uninitiated. As the measure of man, that is, a perfect man or angel, we have the cube as a symbol of perfect proportion. Hence, a square man, meaning a right, just, or upright human being, a balanced human being. The Temple of Solomon, the cubical city, which unfolded becomes a cross, and hence the measure of a man. And you could see here in the diagram the unfolded cube in the shape of the cross, the man. The Temple of Solomon, the cubical city, which unfolded becomes a cross, and the measure of man, they all refer to the work of regeneration or initiation. This reminds us of the cubic stone of Yesod and the stone that the builders refused, mentioned in Psalm chapter 118, verse 22, which is the foundation of the spiritual work and the development of the soul. In Masonry, this stone or rock is called the ashlar, and is something that may be transformed from the rough ashlar into the smooth or perfect ashlar. Let's remember what Jesus says about the rock, Petros or Petra, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 17 through 19. Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar Yonah, for flesh and blood has not been revealed to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, Petros, and on this rock, Petra, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And then again in Luke chapter 6, verse 47 through 49. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock, Petra. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it, because it was founded upon a rock. But the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of this house was great. The building, the house or the temple of God, which is not made with hands, is directly related to the alchemical work, and clearly refers to spiritual development and progress, the solar work, from which results perfect proportion and perfect harmony. This is something symbolic that will be missed by those who are not seeking something deeper in their approach to their life and spirituality. And any questions can be left in the comments area. The cubic stone and the initiatic path. This symbol of the stone or rock has often been misunderstood and misrepresented. The cornerstone of the temple, the philosopher's stone, the authentic cubic stone, has 9 corners and looks like a cube with a pyramid on top. So why 9? The number 9 has deep esoteric significance. In Kabbalah, it is the 9th Hebrew letter, Tet, and corresponds to the 9th Sephirah, Yesod, the 9th sphere, which is translated as foundation. Eliphas Levi says that the number 9 represents the complete truth, perfect initiation. He describes the hieroglyph for Tet as follows. A sage leaning on his staff and holding a lamp in front of himself. He's completely enveloped in his cloak. His inscription is the hermit or the capuchin, a monk, because of the hood and his oriental cloak, but his true name is Prudence. And here we see the card of the hermit. Prudence is the ability to choose the appropriate actions at a given time, meaning to choose the best thing to do in a given situation. Regarding this number, Samuel Ambior says, Arcanum 9, the hermit, initiation, solitude, suffering, from Turon Kabbalah. This arcanum is that of the hermit. And here we can reference this image. He appears as an old man who carries a lantern in his right hand. This lantern must be raised up in order to have light on the path. It must be elevated, raised high in order to illuminate. Arcanum number 9 is the hermit, prudent and wise. It is solitude. Why is this number solitude? Because the spiritual path is very personal and a very individual work, which is particular to our own psychology. Arcanum number 9 clearly indicates the 9 spheres of the atomic infernos of nature and the 9 spheres of the heavens. And we can see here the 9 of the heavens and the 9 infernal. This arcanum also indicates the 9 planets represented in the 9 spheres of the planet Earth. The initiate has to descend to the 9 submerged spheres in order to later attain the 9 heavens which correspond to each planet. One must learn to understand, one must learn to suffer, to be resigned, uncomplaining. Those who do not fail, those who only concern themselves with their own spiritual progress and do not work for others, get absolutely nothing. Whosoever wants to progress has to sacrifice themselves for others. Initiation is life itself, intensely lived, with rectitude and with love. So the number 9 is the number of initiation. It is related to the work upon ourselves, the process of the development of the soul, and freeing the spirit from the bondage of matter. This is the meaning of the work with the stone or the rock upon which the temple of the soul must be built. The temple of the soul is the house of God. In our present state, we are the raw or brute stone, but once we've refined ourselves, chiseled away our defects, our passions, and our vices, then we are the perfect stone. Then our psyche is clean and pure, allowing the divine to inhabit its house. And we welcome any questions or comments there in the comments area. The death of Hiram and the 3 traders. Returning now to the legend of Hiram Abiff. When Hiram's body was first buried, an acacia bush was planted upon his grave. What is the symbolism of this plant? According to Albert Pike, the significance of acacias is as follows. The genuine acacia is also the thorny tamarisk, the same tree which grew up around the body of Osiris. It is a sacred tree among the Arabs, who made the idol Al-Uzza from it, which Muhammad destroyed. It is abundant as a bush in the desert of Thur, and of it the crown of thorns was composed, which was set on the forehead of Jesus of Nazareth. It is a fitting sign of immortality because of its tenacity of life, for it has been known, when planted as a doorpost, to take root and shoot out budding boughs above the threshold. A brief analysis of the history of religion and mystery cults will enable any person to recognize in the Master Mason Hiram, the Osiris of the Egyptians, the Mithras of the Persians, the Bacchus of the Greeks, and even Jesus of the Christians, whose passion, death, and resurrection is still celebrated today. In astrology, Hiram is related to the sun, whose death at the winter solstice and rebirth soon thereafter has been celebrated near the 21st and 22nd of December in all cultures. And we know that to be the dates of the winter solstice corresponding with, again, the death of the sun in the winter. Whether any of these solar heroes or redeemers were historical characters or not, the symbolism of their lives always teaches the same eternal truth. Hiram is, therefore, the prototype for our spiritual development. But then why was he killed? He's killed because the enemies of our soul's development are a real danger for our spiritual progress, and his death highlights these dangers through symbolism. There are 3 main principles or forces which take us away from the spiritual path, symbolized by the 3 traders. They are the misuse of the 3 primary forces within ourselves. So there are 3 degrees in the hierarchy, just like there are 3 doors to the temple. There are 3 rays in the light. There are 3 forces in nature. These forces are symbolized by the ruler, which unites, the lever, which raises, and the mallet or hammer, which affirms. The rebellion of brutal instincts against the aristocratic hierarchy of wisdom successfully arms itself with these 3 forces with which it diverts harmony. There are three typical rebels: the rebel of nature, the rebel of science, the rebel of truth. They were symbolized in the hell of the ancients by the three heads of Cerberus. From Eliphas Levi's History of Magic. These three traitors are also called the Black Dragon with three heads. The three rebels are: first, the one who struck Hiram with the ruler, so the righteous are killed in the name of law and order. This is the history of justice put to death by human passions in the name of law and order. The second one struck Hiram with the lever or the crowbar. This is like the prejudices and beliefs of each epoch, leading to the death of the great initiates. It is thus that the popular lever or square of an insane equality becomes the instrument of tyranny in the hands of the multitude. The third finished off Hiram with a hammer, just as the brutal instincts do when they want to create order in the name of violence and fear. This is like the violence of any epoch which assassinates the righteous and prohibits the diffusion of the secret doctrine. These three traitors control the three bodies called the astral, mental, and causal, which is the willpower. The great clairvoyants have studied these three vehicles, but unfortunately they have not studied what it is within them. The astral is controlled by Sebal, the father of desire. The mental is controlled by Ortalu, the horrible demon of the mind. And the body of willpower, the causal body, is controlled by Stoken, the terrible demon of ill will. These three traitors constitute that which is called the prince of the world. The sacrificed victim is always the internal Christ of all human beings who come to the world. Hiram is our internal Christ. Hiram is the Sun King. Jesus Christ was assassinated by three traitors: Caiaphas, the high priest, Judas Iscariot, and Pilate. It is necessary for us to revive the Christ within ourselves. This is only possible by decapitating the three traitors. This is the esoteric work to convert the lunar elements, the inferior elements of desire, inferior mind, subjective reasoning, and ill will, into their solar counterparts: superior emotion, or love, compassion, superior mind, or objective reasoning, and conscious willpower. This is what the spiritual path is about. The esoteric knowledge is the method of converting ourselves into better people and ultimately into perfect human beings. But this can only occur if we understand that our enemies, the traitors, are within ourselves. We must overcome and conquer ourselves. This is the true meaning of a master, to be a master of oneself. In order to become masters of ourselves, we must know ourselves. Man, know yourself, and you will know the universe. This is why we study Gnostic psychology, so that we can really know what we are, what we have in excess, and what we lack. It is only in this way, by working on ourselves, that we can truly perfect ourselves. Those who take the legend of Hiram in a literal way do not understand its depth or spiritual significance, and will continue to misuse the three primary forces. Instead of avenging the death of Hiram, they avenge that of his assassins. They take the ruler, the square, and the mallet, and write upon them the words liberty, equality, fraternity. That is to say, liberty for desires, equality in degeneration, and fraternity for destruction. All the inferior methods. So to conclude, we'll talk about generation versus regeneration. At the end of the 19th degree in the book Douleur des 33 degrés de l'économiste, des rites, and Chun the accept. by Stanislaw de Lanier says, this degree has as its object the New Jerusalem, that is to say, Masonry regenerated, crushing the three-headed serpent, the false and vain Masonry. From this we can see two very interesting things mentioned. The emphasis on regeneration of Masonry and the three-headed serpent. Here the three-headed serpent symbolizes the misuse of the three primary forces, and crushing it symbolizes the need to stop this misuse in order to regenerate Masonry. So what is regeneration in terms of the three primary forces? In order to understand what regeneration is, we must first understand what generation is. At the end of the 33 degrees listed in the same book quoted above, the author has a short explanation of generation, which he calls system of the universal generation of all beings. The author says that religions, ancient and modern, are all equally physics, and it is only through the principles of nature that one must search for the gods of nations. And since we've learned that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are substances, forces, they're transcendental and extremely divine energies, then we can understand what he's referring to. He explains his understanding of the phenomena of universal generation by saying that it is related to several principles: cause, subject, intermediate, effect, and product, and that 5 powers accomplish the act of generation. But he does not explain regeneration nor its principles very clearly. For example, the last of the 5 powers can be considered as a regenerator. His explanation of generation makes sense in itself, but he often uses generation and regeneration almost interchangeably, suggesting that he does not make a distinction between the two. If he does not know something about authentic regeneration, he is not saying it explicitly or explaining it clearly. Regeneration is directly related to the third force, or the third logos, the reconciliation of spirit and matter. And actually both generation and regeneration are related to the third logos. If we understand generation, then we're prepared to study regeneration. If we want to regenerate ourselves and kill the 3 traitors, the 3-headed serpent or black dragon, then we must first of all comprehend what these 2 concepts are and how to start regeneration. Samuel Aumbier explains these 2 concepts very clearly in chapter 5 and 6 of his book, The Perfect Matrimony. Basically, generation is to create something else which is new, whereas regeneration is to renew something already created, transforming it into something new. And that concludes our reading for this evening. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them in the comments area. And you can join us next week for the next part of the mystery religions of the ancients. Same time next week. I thank you all for tuning in. Next week we will actually have the last class of the mystery religions. And we will have a meditation class the same time tomorrow evening. And once again, we thank you all for tuning in.